I don't usually consider myself too emotional, and I'm reluctant to use negative adjectives as a means to express myself. But even so, I must confess that that video, "Get Your Booty to the Polls," has truly tested my resolve. After watching that video aimed at black males, I find myself feeling absolutely livid and totally disgusted. So I'm going to share some feelings that I wouldn't normally share. Now, I'll place the link to that video in the description below so you can see the video for yourself and maybe you'll feel what I felt. But the visceral message of that so-called ad pushing black men to vote is very blunt. You boys are so ignorant and uneducated that we got to use our booty to get your attention, cause you alls are only interested in sex and drugs and getting something for nothing. So if you alls want to live in your ghetto mentality, then you alls gotta put people in office who are gonna give you what you want, cause what you want is to live in the bottom of the culture and not be held accountable. Well, what you need is an affirmative action for black criminals and all black people, which you ain't gonna get it unless you put people in office who will give it to you. So get your booty out there and vote. Really, we've taken to receiving advice from pole dancers. Pole dancers telling us political ramifications and things that we ought to do. Personally, I don't see how any black American watching that video cannot feel insulted and offended. Even if they don't identify with the image in the video, which I don't, it is the most racist message that I could ever imagine. And I believe it goes back to what I've been saying for a very long time. Why is it acceptable that 70% of black mothers are single women? And why is it acceptable that the black men are not held accountable for impregnating them and then having them deal with the consequences, whether it's having an abortion or raising the children on welfare? To me, that ad is aimed directly at those men and the women who enable those men. Now, I don't believe there's any doubt whatsoever that these women may be looking for a father image. They may be looking for someone to love and someone to protect them. And if they can't have that, and most never do have that, then at least they can have a baby to give their love to. Either way, everyone loses. Then there's this BS about Black Lives Matter. You know, a white friend of mine has a black employee about 50 years old and was raised in Fresno, California. Twice this year, the most recent being a week ago, he's been back to Fresno for a funeral, either for someone he has known his whole life or a son of a long-term friend who was both murdered, one in a drug dispute and one in some meaningless argument. When his friend tried to walk away, the other man killed him. Now, how often is this scenario played out in the black communities across America? So where is the outcry for Black Lives Matter? And then there's all the women and all the children who are murdered and abandoned by their black lovers. Why isn't the black community and its leaders crying out, Black Lives Matter? You know, we humans have an amazing capacity to focus on a rat and ignore the gorilla in the room. We cry out about the huge problem of sex trafficking, and yet we ignore the issue of who are the customers that are willing to pay large sums of money for sex trafficked children and sex trafficked women. Now, we know that they are primarily successful men who come from every walk of life, politics, business, entertainment, and even some of them who profess to have religious beliefs. And it's in that same vein that we cry out that Black Lives Matter, focusing on a couple dozen victims who died by the hands of police while engaged in the police enforcing the law, and then we ignore the thousands who die from abortions and other acts of violence to black people by black people. And please, tell me, why is ignorance, poverty, and violence within our community considered social problems that need to be solved by white people? that we need the white community to solve them? Are we really incapable of being responsible for our own families, our communities, and our country? You know, the rioting and the violence today, not motivated by a desire for equality whatsoever, but what we do hear is the voice of Antifa demanding that blacks be given special treatment. Why shouldn't we be held to the same standards as other races, particularly the white race? Because we can't compete on an equal footing? I don't believe that's true. I remember a letter recently a black father wrote to LeBron James saying that because most young black youth are raised without an authority figure in their lives, they don't know how to respond to a command by a police officer when told to stop. And then I often think of my own father, who made sure that I learned to respect authority. And if I didn't, I paid the price much earlier in my life, which was very, very mild compared to a bullet. However, today, rather than expect that young black men and women should be taught to respect authority, to treat people with respect, or engage in normal civilized behavior, we want to dumb down the rules to meet their supposedly low emotional IQ because we're not going to hold black women accountable for the men that they have unprotected sex with, knowing that these men are not going to be accountable for the children that they sire. The sad truth seems to be that a large segment of the black community has made being black their master identity, either because they believe the lie that they really aren't capable of competing on an equal basis, or they promote it as a tool for political power. Either way, their message is quite simple. Blacks need affirmative action in the laws and the rules, and we need it so we won't be held accountable for our actions. Now, unless I'm missing something, and I could be, I only see two possible explanations. Either we really are incapable of being held on an equal basis with others, or we have been told that lie for so long through more than 200 years of slavery in the South and another 100 years of Southern segregation, not to mention the 55 years of Democratic Party myth, that a large percentage of us have come to believe the lie as though it were the truth. Often I and others who share my beliefs feel a sense of being overwhelmed as we try to express why we identify as black conservatives and why I love the freedom I have in this country, and I love our country itself. America has an African heritage that has given it an energy and a drive that's made the American culture a predominant force throughout the world in every respect. Unfortunately, though, that energy and drive is being driven like a knife in our corporate hearts. Now, nowhere is this better illustrated than in the presidency of Barack Obama. 155 years after slavery was abolished, America elected a black president. Go America! Yet, instead of heralding this as a monumental achievement, Obama and other black leaders condemn America because of her past as they focus on every little wound, blemish, and imperfection that they can find. America is a bad country, they tell us, and that's the complete opposite of what I and other black conservatives say. But perhaps, just perhaps, the volume of their hatred and the volume of their disgust can somehow be balanced by our love power. Now, I speak to you from my heart, and I promise to be brutally honest in my assessment of our country from now on. I'll be honest about where we've been, where we are, and most importantly, where we're going. May take some tough love, according to what James Dobson says. However, I owe it to you, and I owe it to the future of America. But most of all, I owe it to me.